My name is Cathy Melesky Dante. I'm a PhD candidate at Marquette University in the theology department.
And what led you to pursue the path of research that you're on?
So I'm researching sexual abuse by Catholic leaders, and I'm looking at what lay people can do to respond in solidarity with people who have been abused by Catholic leaders. I'm particularly looking at structures within the Catholic Church that have perpetuated the abuse. And that's how I come to the topic of spiritual abuse. I think the structures where people experience spiritual abuse also can lead to sexual abuse.
For your particular research, is there a particular region of the world that you're focused on?
I am mostly focusing on US, but I'm interested in trying to draw on sources from other areas of the world too. I'm looking forward to being in Guam in large part because I hear that this has been an issue in Guam as well, and because I haven't met a lot of people that are really interested in talking about spiritual abuse or abuse in a Catholic setting or faith settings in general. So I'm excited to meet some people in Guam. You also asked about my other sources that I draw from. I draw from some scholars in Africa. There's one named Sister Jose Ngula, who is researching specifically sexual assault of religious women, so nuns, who are basically trafficked to different people, donors or priests or other people. And she's really opened my eyes to the pain and suffering that women religious in Africa are experiencing. I also look at some sources from liberation theology, so Central and South America, just for the theoretical and theological perspective, because they're so good about emphasizing the experience of people on the margins and how to interact with people like who don't have as much privilege and power, and how to instruct people and guide people on who have more power and privilege to use that power and privilege in an ethical way.
What makes your work significant, especially like you said, it's timely for Guam. So what would you say makes the work especially significant now?
There has been less theological response over history. It made the headlines. Sexual abuse by Catholic leaders made the headlines in 2002 when the Boston Globe Spotlight report came out. And I was living in Massachusetts and working as a social worker at the time that it came out. And it was significant for me. I had left the Catholic Church as a young adult and I came back as a social worker, in part because I wanted to participate and be part of that change that I thought was really necessary. I thought the issue had kind of resolved itself, but in 2018, just as I was starting PhD work, it broke again from Pennsylvania and made national news again. So I realized that as I looked at theology, there just wasn't a lot of theology written about what to do. It was mostly focused on priests and how priests needed to change. And I'm not saying that abuse is okay. I'm not saying that and I'm not saying that people who abuse or cause harm should not change. But I think there's a whole system and a whole structure beyond that people can speak to and participate in and feel less powerless about what's going on in the world, feel like they have something to offer. So what I'm finding is that that's a unique perspective and something that I want to bring forward, because I'm hoping that I can teach people or help people to feel more empowered in very practical ways to respond to the crisis. I'm still working through some of those conversations and what that looks like. And that's actually some of what I'm looking forward to learning from participants as they want to share some of their strategies for empowerment. They've worked with folks who have experienced domestic or interparent violence.
Why do you think there's been such little research done on this topic?
I think it's a really hard topic to think about. There's a psychologist named Lisa Oakley who writes on spiritual abuse, and she thinks that if a church is supposed to be a place where one encounters a good and loving God, that to think about abuse in a setting where we're supposed to encounter something good and loving can really be jarring and evoke a responsive resistance within people. I'm elaborating a little bit on how she speaks about it, but I think there's something about that we go to church and we have certain expectations, and abuse is not really part of those expectations. And so when abuse is alleged in some way, or if it's happening in some way, it's harder for us to see because it doesn't make sense in our worldview.
What change would you like to see, or do you think is possible in, say, the next 5, 10 years?
I volunteer with an organization called Awake. It's a Milwaukee, Wisconsin-based group. Started off that way, but they do a lot of work online. They do education. They just focus a lot on the experience of people who have been sexually abused by Catholic leaders. And they also do prayer experiences, again, kind of be a cross between. The prayer is often online, although we do some in-person local events as well. My hope is that through experiences like that, people can become more aware of what the problem is, and that in that they can certainly learn some ways to be more trauma informed, how to be allies with people who have been sexually abused by Catholic leaders, how to believe it with some basic skills. And Awake's got some nice blog posts and videos about how to do that. I also want people to be open, though, to something surprising and new, and I don't really know what that would be. My other job as work outside of PhD work is as a spiritual director. And so I have a lot of conversation with people to help them to be open to God and how God meets them where they are and then calls them into something else. And I think everybody's got a journey. Like, I think we're all built for something bigger than we are as humans. And that as we respond to whatever that bigger is, with that higher power, that God, my God of my understanding is the Christian God, that there's some that leads us into places that are beyond our imagination. And when we find other people who are also being led in that way and following those dreams, new really comes in beautiful ways, in ways that can promote justice. It's pretty abstract, I realize.
It's very interesting. And as far as the folks that maybe they're a family member, a loved one, or a friend who knows somebody who's gone through this experience, how do you lead them, sort of, if you end up working with them at all, on this journey of support and better understanding?
I haven't had the opportunity to do long-term work, but I've met some of those folks personally at different events. And what they tell me is that they believe their loved one. They believe that that person has been abused, and they don't ask a question about whether or not it's true. They don't get into interrogating. And then they take some time with their own experience of, well, how does that feel for me? They don't bring that maybe to their loved one, but they bring that to other trusted sources. Maybe it's a spiritual director, maybe it's a family friend or a family member, or maybe it's somebody else that they trust, to do some thinking about and praying with, well, what does that mean for me? And what I see is that changes people and changes them so that they start to advocate for people who have been abused in this way. There's an example that I can offer. There's a gentleman named Nate Lindstrom, who is a survivor of sexual abuse by Catholic leaders out in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He committed suicide not long ago for reasons if you Google his name, you can find out more about the story. But what his parents have done is started to speak out against sexual abuse by Catholic leaders and tell Nate's story more. There have been demonstrations by people to just raise awareness. They stand with posters sometimes to just say, hey, this has been a problem for our son. And these are the people that are implicated in some of this. And I don't think that they are doing that in a way that is shaming. I think that they're doing that in a way to say, wait, this is a real thing that happened. Our son had consequences. We want other people to know that this exists so that they can help and respond. And I guess I see it as a combination of education and advocacy.
So how important is it to believe, especially the victim's testimony?
I think it's very important. I think that is actually the key. That first response of believing is key to future healing. And I've heard that from people in law enforcement. I've heard that from therapists. I've seen that within the Awake community.
And for such a small community and tight-knit community as Guam is, where we have families, big families, do you see any sort of difference or correlation to how we can support victims in Guam?
So in a small community like that, yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to find people that can be supportive. I'm just pausing. It's one of the ethical questions that I struggle with, is how do you find those people? And recognizing that there's often a delay in reporting, at least for clergy abuse survivors. I don't know if other survivors are the same. My hope is that the group that again immediately comes to mind is Awake, and another one is Snap. They have folks that are distant, they're outside, they're familiar with sexual abuse by Catholic leaders, if not experienced it themselves. And they're often very willing to sit and talk with people. And those are conversations that can happen through technology, by phone, by Zoom, by WhatsApp. There's all sorts of ways to do that. That could be a source of comfort. I hope that those conversations would be sources of comfort and consolation for people who are struggling with this. I don't know victims advocate situation, the victim resource coordinator on the island. I've had a little contact with a priest on the island who's very clear that this is an important issue and needs lots of attention. I think that's why I'm here. I've heard stories from survivors that conversations with the diocesan reporting process and the diocesan contacts for safeguarding or for victim assistance coordinators are kind of hit or miss. Some people really get it, some people are really trauma informed, and some people aren't. My suggestion for anybody who chooses to go through that process or wants to start talking in general would be find a trusted friend. And if people are struggling to know who can be trusted, I would encourage people to pay attention to their reactions to other people. Our bodies are really interesting. Our bodies can tell us things about people and how we might respond or how we might feel that don't necessarily speak logically to our brains, but are still really important data to have. So that might be a piece as one is trying to figure out who is trustworthy to pay attention to. If I'm feeling tight, I might not actually, even though it's somebody in front of me who I ought to trust, if I'm feeling really tight, maybe I don't. Maybe there's something going on there that they're not as trustworthy.
Why should people care about this particular issue? Especially say they're not Catholic. We do have a population in Guam that's not Catholic as well, but what would be your message as to why people should care about this issue?
I think that outside accountability for the Catholic Church can be very helpful. Being in the family, so to speak, of the Catholic Church and being in a family, we start to accept things or just assume that things are normal, that somebody from the outside might say, hey, wait, there's a question I have about this. So having somebody come look at things from the outside can be very helpful when people, especially in helping people identify areas that need to change. I've also seen survivors start to file lawsuits or attorney general reports being very helpful in raising awareness. And sometimes I think people find more support through those sources than they're able to find within the Catholic Church or their own community. So outside people, I hope that you have the courage to speak up against this problem, identify ways that we can address it within the Catholic community from the perspective that is your unique idea about how, what can we do? People want to be able to access God. People want to be able to access what is good and loving. How can we as a Catholic Church help repair that? And how can you help hold us accountable?
What does it mean to you to fight this?
I think it means an exhausting journey. It feels isolating and alone. Part of that's because I'm in a dissertation. And that's a process only I can do in conjunction with my mentors. I don't have a lot of hope that my work alone can help. It can affect other people and maybe make a difference in a small circle. But I think it is part of a larger response that is necessary in order to change this and maybe change whatever structures in other places. I try to draw hope from seeing how the little changes that have happened, the people that can smile a little bit better, the people who are saying, wow, that I really didn't know that was that much of a problem. And now I want to do something about it. And I've got a tool in my hands that I can use to do that. Those are some of the things. You didn't ask me about hope, but I find that this journey needs hope. And those are some of the places I find it.
Love that. And lastly, the call to action. How can people get involved? What inspiration do you leave for them to be able to take action and stand with you?
If somebody tells you that they've been abused, Say, I'm sorry that happened to you. I believe you. How can I support you?